Are the Royals starting to get high-end talent in their farm system again? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We always welcome the new listeners here and want as many new listeners before the season as we can get. But if you want to know a little bit about my background, I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Do a lot of work over there. But when it comes to just baseball, when it comes to the Royals, that's what we bring you with this podcast. 5 episodes a week in season. Right now, we're in a little bit of an off season, though spring training is right around the corner, which we are going to be down for a few days, especially during that first full week of workouts. So we'll have tons of coverage there. So this is really the perfect time to hop on and start gearing up for Royals baseball. Now, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, for our first segment today, we are going to take a little bit of a dip into the Royals minor league system because I know for a few of you out there, you've been asking about which guys can make an impact in 2025 if they're not going to spend a lot of money in free agency, which they haven't, other than the Michael Wacha extension and the Michael Lorenzen deal. Of course, Jonathan India was acquired via trade. But if they're not going to be spending as much as they did last offseason, for some of you fans, it's been turning to the minor league system and which guys could get up there rather quickly. I know Jack Caglione is everybody's favorite guy to talk about, but there are some talented players down in the Royals farm system that I do believe are not just talented, but we're talking about above average big league players. And I think that's where we're going to start today because Kiley McDaniel came out with his top 100. He had Jack Caglione and Blake Mitchell, I think both inside the top 50. Didn't have Carter Jensen on that list, but I think Baseball America had all 3 of those guys as top 100 prospects. And that's where I think you do have to tread lightly when it comes to evaluating a prospect. Just because they've got a number next to their name and they are considered a top 100 prospect does not mean they are going to be a surefire star or that they are going to be an above average starter or they're going to be a home run king, as Kiley McDaniel called Jack Caglione. A lot of it is going to be luck. A lot of it's going to be timing, and just everything has to go right for that player to be seen as a great prospect and then turn into a big-time star at the big league level. In fact, in my lifetime, I think the only player the Royals drafted where from the get-go it was there are 2 can't-miss prospects in this draft. This guy is one of them. He gets to the minor league level, tears it up, gets to the big league level, tears it up, was Bobby Witt Jr. Alex Gordon was one of those guys that was kind of pegged as the next George Brett. I think he had a phenomenal career, certainly a Royals legend, Royals Hall of Famer, but he was not the next George Brett. Like Bobby Witt Jr. to me was that one where the Royals drafted him and he was called a can't-miss prospect next to Adley Rutschman. He got to the minor league system, pretty much tore it up, got to the big leagues, took some time, but then became an MVP level player. But even then, it took some growing pains. It wasn't seamless for him. So in my lifetime, when you're taking a first-round pick or you're going over your first-round pick, it's not going to be an easy transition. Sometimes those guys, as a lot of Royals fans know, don't amount to much. So let me be very clear. Jack Caglione, Blake Mitchell, Carter Jensen are talented prospects in baseball right now. And I think if you asked a lot of scouts out there, they would say the same, that these guys can be above average big league ball players. But still, a lot has to go into it. A mental part of this is a huge deal because if those guys lose confidence at any point or they start to doubt themselves or question themselves, it can turn into a disaster. And we've seen that in the Royals organization on more than just a few occasions. So that's what I get to with these three guys. And Jack Caglione, I think by far and away was everybody's favorite pick of the last few years because he fell to the Royals. You'd felt like they'd been screwed out of the lottery system, but a guy like him who was top 3 talent falls all the way to Kansas City, and they get one of the most feared hitters and a two-way player from the University of Florida. Now, in these top 100 breakdowns, Kylie McDaniel at least brings up Jack Caglione as a future home run king if it all goes right. But he has to really upgrade his approach. He has to polish it up a bit if he can be that Titan-like figure in the Royals lineup. And I think the Royals do have that belief that it's going to happen. And then when it gets to Blake Mitchell, he brings up the defense, but also kind of acknowledges the power that he possesses. And I think that's another part to this as well. Blake Mitchell has really surprised me in the prospect that he's become. I think the swing and miss needs to be cut down a lot, but in terms of overall approach, I think the Royals have a very solid prospect in Blake Mitchell. And Carter Jensen might be one of my favorite prospects in the Royals system just because he's a local kid. Talked to him last spring training. Really, really intelligent player, and I think is going to have the bat to translate from AA to AAA, from AAA to the big leagues. But the point of this segment today is not to tell you that these guys are good and that I believe they're going to get to Kansas City, because I do think with each and every one of these prospects, they're going to get there. Okay, I think whether it be this year or next year, I think these three players will be up in Kansas City, unless, of course, they were dealt in some blockbuster deal. But as we've seen in the last 2 years, the Royals are not really up for it when it comes to acquiring a player for one of those three guys. And I think there's a couple of pitchers they really want to hold on to. But the question now becomes, are these good players or are these well above average players? You're talking cream of the crop talent, where when they get up to the big leagues, it's a big deal because these guys are going to be studs. And now in the last couple of years, it's really been about how the Royals construct their big league roster through trades and through free agency. There haven't been many prospects other than Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino that have made the big-time impact, where you go, that guy can be an all-star level player. I'm still very high on Michael Massey. I think he can be a great player for this team in 2025. I still think, even though Michael Garcia is a little bit of a different story, he was a prospect in the system. I think he can get there. But when I talk about high-end talent, I'm not talking about a guy taking 2 or 3 years to develop at the big league level. I'm talking about somebody that when they get called up, you saw what Wyatt Langford did for Texas, right? Barely any time at the minor league level, comes up, and he was great for the Rangers. There are just more and more scenarios now where draft picks don't get eased along at the minor league level. If they prove that they are better than that competition, they're going to be up in Kansas City. So to me, I feel like Jack Caglione has that type of ceiling where if he goes in the minor league level and tears it up, you're going to have a guy that from day one when he gets called up, not that he won't go through some issues and won't go through some struggles, but you're talking about somebody who you're counting on to be a key piece in that lineup, right? That's what I look at with these three guys, because for the last handful of years, other than Bobby Witt Jr., some of their better players or their starters weren't really those can't-miss guys or those players that once they got up, you expected them to be a big piece of that lineup. Bobby Witt Jr. was one of them, of course. Vinny Pasquantino really worked his way through the minor league system. Michael Massey, same thing. Kyle Isbell, in my opinion, was rushed. I didn't think they should have brought him up in 2021, but I think they were so impressed with what he did in the COVID year without the minor league season. They loved his defense, and then I thought they mishandled that a little bit. Michael Garcia, I thought it was fine to bring him up when they did. MJ Melendez, he was really tearing it up, and then when he got to the big league level, they exposed some holes in his swing. But I think you can be really excited as a Royals fan knowing that these guys do have high-end potential. I think they've got pretty big ceilings, and a big reason as to why, especially when it comes to Carter Jensen and Blake Mitchell, they kind of go against the grain of what old Royals prospects and old hitting philosophies were in the organization, where I think a big part of the last 10, 15 years in the Royals organization was we value speed, defense, putting the ball in play. Where you see with Mitchell and Carter Jensen, I think two guys that can be great defensive catchers, or if one of them moves, I'd expect it to be Carter Jensen because Blake Mitchell is a little bit better, in my opinion, behind the plate. But with Carter Jensen, I think he could transition to third base or the outfield. But the bat is what really impresses me. Both of them have power, a really smooth, pretty swing. The walk rates are great. I think the pitch selection is solid. Whereas some of the prospects in the past, it was all about let's put the ball in play. We're freely swinging. You got to be aggressive, this and that. I think those two guys have really transformed into being polished hitters. And we saw that with Vinny Pasquantino, which is why I think he stuck so well in Kansas City, was he really felt like that first guy to have that approach, get to Kansas City in the last 5 years, and then stay there and be counted on as a big-time piece in the lineup. I mean, even Salvador Perez, who was seen as an unbelievable prospect in the system, he's always been a free swinger. That's not going to change. And I think that's also the beauty of it, where Salvador Perez is still a part of that old school Royals approach, which they still have a lot of it in the lineup today. Michael Garcia kind of has that approach. Michael Massey has that approach. Kyle Isbell does. But the few in the Royals minor league system that display that pitch selection, display the power, I think those guys can transform into big-time hitters. And that's why I think when it comes to Jack Caglione, if that pitch selection is there, he's going to be one of those can't-miss guys. If that really comes along and he's able to lay off some of those pitches that minor league pitchers are going to try to get him out on, you're going to see a fast track. So I'm starting to believe once again, and it's been a while when you've had more than just one guy in the system that you feel really good about. They had the pitchers with Brady Singer and Coar and Bubich and Lynch. A lot of those guys were top 100 guys. Kyle Isbell was, I think, too. There was a point in 2018 and 19 that they had an abundance of them, but not all of them lived up to that top 100 hype. So you got to be careful with that. But with this group, I'm starting to feel very confident with who they can be. And, looking ahead to 2025 or late in the season and then 2026, these are some guys that I think when they get called up, it's not you want to protect them and you shouldn't expect too much. I think all three of those guys, when they get up there, can be seen as big-time contributors and have the power to do so. Certainly Jack Caglione leads that group. But those three guys, I think they are the three hitters to watch in all of not just the Royals organization, but all of baseball to see how they progress this upcoming season. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, how worried are we about the rotation regressing, considering how good they were last season? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our one and only sponsor in FanDuel, at least our only sponsor for today's show. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, including the Kansas City Chiefs. There's just endless possibilities when you're looking at that upcoming game, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easier to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. I thought this would be a good transition when talking about the Royals minor league system, what's going to be out there, and also what's going to be returning. But what was the strength of the 2024 team? And I do not think that, outside of Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez and Vinny Pasquantino, what they did at the top of the lineup, it's no surprise it's the rotation. The rotation was the lifeblood of the 2024 Royals. And, to my surprise, I didn't think they were all that great with the exception of a few starts in the postseason, right? Seth Lugo didn't work as deep into the games. Cole Reagans was phenomenal, but even he had a, average-ish start against the Yankees in Game 2. The Royals did win that. But then you had, Michael Wacha not go as deep in Game 4 like they needed him to. But it doesn't erase what happened in the regular season, which was complete and utter consistency. And oftentimes, dominance from the top three guys in that rotation. Now it's going to be a little bit different because you trade away Brady Singer for Jonathan India because you need more on-base help at the top of the lineup. But whether you're inputting Chris Bubich or Alec Marsh, it's a lot of innings you got to eat. They bring back Michael Lorenzen, who was pretty solid when healthy for Kansas City in the second half. But I don't blame fans for being a little bit skeptical about, the possibility of them doing exactly what they did in 2024. Because Seth Lugo is in his mid-30s. And we did see some slight regression from Seth Lugo in the second half. There was that stretch of time where when he was facing the Twins, I think he also got roughed up against Boston as well. Then found his footing once again in September and rolled it into the postseason. But I wouldn't blame you if you said, look, he's 34, 35 years old. He threw over 200 innings last year. He had never done that at the big league level. We saw the slight signs of regression. I don't count on Seth Lugo to do that again in 2025. And I do think that it's all right to believe that way. I'm not going to shun you or call you stupid for believing that or call you a hater for anything like that, because there are signs for starting pitchers once they hit their mid-30s, the decline starts to happen. And I am one of those people that believes thinking Seth Lugo can throw over 200 innings again, 210 with a 3.00 ERA, it's a bit of a stretch, right? Because that is a career season, and oftentimes those career years are not followed up by better ones when you're in your mid-30s. Now, Cole Reagans, it's not going to surprise me if he tops what he did last year, if he is a Cy Young winner, if he stays healthy once again, which I'm not really sure after last season. You go into 2025 going, oh, well, I'm still nervous about him and getting hurt. That happens with pitchers. Like, there is no stopping that in baseball. You could have a clean bill of health for a decade, and then the final 5 years of your career, you can't stay healthy. With Cole Reagans, since being in a Royals uniform, he's never dealt with really anything more than some cramps that he had on the mound, right? We were concerned about the velocity dip in the second half, but it was just him saving his arm for later on. And when he was throwing 93, 94 in the first, he then could run it up 96, 97, 98 by his 98th, 99th, and 100th pitch, right? So that, to me, was never really worrisome. And the Royals pitching staff is not naive to that. If there was a problem, if there was a concern, they wouldn't have let him go so deep into a lot of those games. So Cole Reagans, to me, I don't see the regression on. I think everything supports Cole Reagans still being an ace of this team, still being a 200 inning guy, being a 200 strikeout guy. I'm going to stand by that because I'm a big believer in Cole Reagans, and I hope at some point this season they can work out an extension, because if he follows up last year with a Cy Young type year this year, you might have, let him outprice you, basically. So you're number one in the rotation. I don't see having any severe regression. Seth Lugo, I'm going to expect some slight regression, but also keep in mind that he is the epitome of consistency. Even when he was regressing a little bit in the second half, it was just that he was regressing from throwing 7 innings of shutout ball every single time. Right? He had 25 quality starts, it felt like, by the end of the first half. Right? So that feels a little bit unlikely to replicate. But if you're going to have some regression, I don't think there is any issue with Seth Lugo throwing 160 innings to 180, having an ERA around 3.5, racking up 160 to 170 strikeouts. I don't think there is any issue there. He's going to have great command. He's going to play to his defense. The spin rate is still fine. I think even if you had the slight regression, it doesn't absolutely tear apart your rotation. Then you get to Michael Wacha. The Royals really believe that Michael Wacha can build off what he did last year. Otherwise, I don't think they give him that 3-year deal. That was a big part of the trust they had, rewarding him for what he did last year, but also saying that Michael Wacha has gotten better with age. Right after it looked like his career was nearly down and out, I think, with Tampa Bay, he found himself again. Found himself in San Diego, got even better with Kansas City, and I think we were left wanting a little bit more from Michael Wacha. Not, his fault, but that he got put on the IL with that fractured foot and pitched the rest of the game. I was in attendance for it when Luis Arraez rocketed one off his foot and facing his old team in San Diego, and he pitched 5 more innings with a fractured foot. And then he missed a few starts, but the Royals were able to pick him up a little bit, but came back and really hit his stride. Other than April when he struggled, and he did the same thing in 2023, he was nails. And I think Michael Wacha is one of those guys too, where he's going to throw a lot of strikes. He's got a devastating changeup. And if you've got some of those things going for you and you've got that clean bill of health, the regression you're thinking is not going to be one where you go from a 3.2 ERA to a 5.6, right? There might be some slight regression there. But to me, Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo are so consistent and do a lot of the things that data supports. You want to look at somebody where regression could happen, and I'm not saying this because he's no longer a Royal. Like Brady Singer in Great American Ballpark is probably projected for not just some regression, pretty hefty regression, because it's a hitter's ballpark, right? Some of the numbers might have been better because of the defense that played behind him. And we know with Brady Singer and how the Royals viewed him, that they were very complimentary of him. They loved what he was able to do. But come postseason time, they had a 3-man rotation. And if it got to a 4th starter, I think they would have maybe had to choose between Lorenzen and Singer. But Lorenzen was just coming off the injured list, so it probably would have been Brady Singer. So I do think that's one guy where you look at some of the advanced data and you think you got a little bit lucky last year. So you can expect that regression. I think with guys like Seth Lugo, and not all the data supports it, he definitely benefited from a good defense, a pitcher's ballpark. The expected ERA is not where you'd want it to be. But I think with the command and the spin rate, that helps him out a lot. Having pinpoint command, it doesn't matter if you're 25 or you're 40, you're going to be able to get a lot of outs. So with this starting rotation, do I expect them to be the second best in baseball behind Seattle again? Probably not, but I don't think it's a stretch to say they can be top 5 in the AL again and top 10 in all of baseball. And what's better about it is that I think the bullpen's stronger. That was something that was a huge weak point for last year's team. So if you want to give in a little bit, the rotation is going to have some regression, even though I think Chris Bubich can fill that role nicely, or maybe him and Alec Marsh can tag team it. You're picking it up, I think, in the bullpen. You've got a legitimate closer in Lucas Ursig. You've got a healthier John Schreiber, know what he can do. Angel Serpa, who can run it up 98, 99. You've got Sam Long out there. You've got Hunter Harvey looking to bounce back. Where you were last year was Will Smith as your closer, Nick Anderson out there trying to be a late inning guy. You had Chris Stratton try to be a late inning guy. I think it's going to be an improvement in the bullpen, even if there is some slight regression in the starting rotation. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, right now, does the American League look worse than it was at the end of last year, or is it going to be better? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And a reminder for the rest of this week, I probably should have done it to kick off the show. We're going to have this episode, of course, and then tomorrow going to have a morning/afternoon episode. So that does mean we're not going to have a Mailbag Friday episode, but I'm still going to put out the tweet, and I'm going to try to answer every single question that I have on that Friday. Might be a little bit busy, but I can promise you by the end of the weekend, I'll have all those answers for you guys, because I know as we're gearing up for spring training, you're going to be having a lot of questions on free agency, if they're going to make a trade, who to watch in spring training. So if you have those, leave them below on this YouTube page, or just go to my Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. I'll be sure to answer them on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. But yeah, we're going to have this episode tonight, and then we're going to have another one that's not a mailbag tomorrow morning/afternoon. What we want to wrap up today's show with is the American League, and looking at the American League, how it compares to last year, who's going to be better, who's going to be worse. And I think we can start things off with the American League Central. The Royals, I think, as I've said pretty much all offseason long, once they get to spring training, then I can pretty much know what that roster is going to be, what they're going to look like. And I know that goes the same for pretty much everybody we're about to talk with, but I just have that hunch that the Royals aren't completely done just yet, but for the most part, their roster feels pretty set. There are going to be people out there that I think believe the Royals are going to take a few steps back because they didn't do enough. They expect that starting pitching regression. Maybe they expect Salvador Perez to regress for how good he was last season. Maybe they're concerned about health and depth and all of that. But the Royals finished 86 and 76 last year. I think their steamer projections were around 84. It's going to be a very tight American League Central again. Cleveland, to me, I think they can be such a tough out because of that bullpen. However, I don't think they really did anything for their offense other than subtract, and that was an issue for them. Their starting pitching still has some concerns to me. They do got Shane Bieber coming back. They didn't have him for basically the entire year. I think he made 1 or 2 starts before having Tommy John surgery. So Cleveland's one of those teams I do expect a little bit of regression. Detroit, I will be honest, I'm slightly disappointed from a baseball fan standpoint that they had this incredible tear, went to Game 5 of the ALDS, and yet they haven't added anybody offensively, to my knowledge. They added Alex Cobb to their rotation and then went out there and I thought got a great signing in Tommy Canely, who just throws an abundance of changeups, used to be throwing 98, 99, 100 every single time. Now he'll throw 17 straight changeups if he wants to. So Detroit, they're going to have an electric bullpen. I think they're going to have a great starting rotation. But I thought, honestly, with the money they had to spend, Tarek Skubal needed a true number 2. Just because when the Tigers were in the postseason, they had to go with an opener than the bullpen. And it worked for a little bit in the postseason. But for an extended period of time, an entire season, I thought the Tigers could do a little bit more damage. And maybe they do. Maybe Tommy Canely was just the start of something, and now they're going to really start adding some pieces. Minnesota, I don't know if I can say they're going to win the Central as confidently as I did last year, because that Twins team is talented, considering that they've got the same group for the last 3 seasons. Carlos Correa's back. Byron Buxton's going to be there. Royce Lewis is going to be there. The starting rotation is going to have Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, who always gives the Royals fits, Johan Duran in the back end of that bullpen. No, Eduardo Julian's going to probably be up a handful of times. Jose Miranda, same thing. But the Twins haven't done anything, and the Twins rarely make moves in the offseason, so I really don't have any anticipation that they're going to be phenomenal next year, and they're coming off an 82 and 80 season where they completely torpedoed in the month of September. Yes, on paper, they are talented and absolutely can win the Central. It's also the same guys you're counting on that you've been counting on for 5 years, and they prove they can't stay healthy. Royce Lewis, unbelievable talent, can't stay healthy. Byron Buxton, unbelievable talent, can't stay healthy. Correa's battled his injuries now. So for the Twins, I don't expect them to make any more moves. Maybe they have a bullpen move here or there, or maybe add a bat or 2. But to me, I think they're kind of that middle of the pack and probably a little bit worse than where I thought they'd be last season. Chicago, I think, is obviously going to be better than 41 and 121. I like a couple of the 1-year deals they've given out to guys this offseason. So I think they're going to be closer to a 55 to 60 win team, which is crazy to think that'd be nearly a 20-win improvement based off of last season. But I don't think they're going to be as bad as, the rest of the American League Central teams going 12 and 1 or 13 and 0 against them. You look at the AL East, Yankees, they did lose Juan Soto, but they've been very aggressive. And getting Max Fried, getting Devin Williams. I think that bullpen's going to be nasty. Luke Weaver in the back end. Got to go through Aaron Judge. But I do think the Yankees, at least offensively, aren't going to be as frightening as they were last year. When you had to go through that top 3, right? It's so difficult to go through a lineup that even has one MVP candidate. You have to face 2 guys back to back. Yeah, I think the Yankees are going to have a better rotation for sure and a better bullpen. But offensively, I don't think they're going to be able to flex their muscles as much. I still think they win the American League East. I think they're going to be the number 1 seed in the American League. But to not have Juan Soto, I have to say that's a few pegs down when looking at the Yankees. Baltimore, man, you talk about a make or break year for them. And I think MLB did an article on this where the Orioles, they're not the baby O's anymore, the baby birds, if you want to call them that, because now they're under a lot of pressure. First year, they win 100 games with that young and improved group, and they get swept out of the ALDS. Last year, they get swept by, of course, the Kansas City Royals in the wild card. There's a lot of pressure now, and I think that Boston getting better, that's the one team I'm highlighting. I think Boston's going to be much better than 81 and 81. I've liked a lot of what they've done this offseason, especially for the rotation. I think what they're also going to be doing for the bullpen. So I like Boston to maybe leapfrog Baltimore and kind of have that battle out with the Yankees. But the Orioles, to me, I think did get a little bit worse. And I think some Orioles fans are pretty upset with how the offseason has gone. Tampa Bay, they brought in Ha-Sung Kim on a 2-year deal today. I just think they've been relatively quiet, and not being able to play in their home ballpark, I think that will affect them. Toronto gets Santander. I think a slight improvement for only 74 wins, but a tough division they're going to be in. Then lastly, look at the AL West. Houston, I'm never counting out the Astros. I don't care how the season starts. I think the Astros are going to win the division. Texas, they're going to be back, in my opinion. 78 and 84 is not how good they really were last season. I think that they still have a very loaded lineup. They need guys to stay healthy, especially in that rotation. But to keep Seager intact, Marcus Semien, Wyatt Langford out there, they've added a few pieces. I think the Rangers can leapfrog Seattle because Seattle just hasn't done enough offensively, I think, to impress a lot of people. They're going to have one of the better rotations in baseball. But to me, I think Texas can leapfrog them. And here's another sleeper to me. I think the Athletics, even though they're in Sacramento, I love the way they've assembled their roster. I really, really do. They only won 69 games last year. Maybe it can be a little bit tougher to go play in a minor league ballpark for visiting teams, but Lawrence Butler, Brent Rooker, J.J. Bleday, you bring in Luis Severino, you still got Mason Miller, a couple other young pieces. You like Shea Langoliers as well behind the plate. There are just guys on that team that I think are going to have some pretty big upside, and don't be surprised if they rattle off 75 to 80 wins and get close to 500. I like the way they've assembled their roster this offseason. And then lastly, the Angels, maybe a little bit better than 63 and 99, but not by much. I just can't put too much stock into the Angels, despite them spending a little bit more money than they did this last offseason. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we'll have that morning/afternoon episode. Might take a deeper dive into the roster and the invites coming into spring training. Which guys may surprise me, but again, we'll dive into that tomorrow. Until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.